What if I told you that every person you've ever met has already told you who they are, not through their words, not through their smiles, and certainly not through their social masks, but through the cracks they try to hide? Most people spend their lives trying to look unreadable, believing that silence and smiles will shield their truths, but the reality is this: no one is truly unreadable. They are only temporarily unchallenged. If you want to master power, persuasion, or even simple human understanding, you must learn to see what is not being said, and more importantly, to listen to what people do when they think you're not watching. The secret to reading people isn't in some psychic trick or body language checklist. It begins in knowing that everyone is driven by something they can't fully hide. Watch what they chase, watch what they avoid. The ambitious man cannot help but speak about status. The insecure woman cannot resist the need for validation. The manipulator can't help but test boundaries. People's values slip out in every small decision: how they treat someone beneath them, how they react when ignored, what they laugh at, what they defend. Forget what they tell you about themselves. Watch what their patterns scream. A person's priorities are not what they claim. They are what they protect when they're under threat. And this is where control begins, in silence. The most powerful observers are those who remain calm, ask little, and say even less. Let others fill the silence, for people expose themselves in their hunger to be heard. If you speak too quickly, you reveal your own position. But if you watch closely, people will reveal where they are vulnerable, where they are prideful, and where they fear to be seen. Silence is not just the absence of sound, it is a mirror. In your stillness, others become louder. Let them speak. Let them show you their illusions. The trick is not to trust what they say, but to notice what they emphasize, what they repeat, and what they never talk about. But the most precise truths about a person are uncovered under tension. You want to know someone's loyalty, pressure them. You want to understand their pride, slight them gently. You want to see their fears. Corner them with silence. Under pressure, all masks weaken. Most people can uphold their persona in calm weather, but life isn't always calm. A sudden shift in tone, a subtle test of patience, or the mere act of ignoring them can trigger their true self to emerge. Pay attention to how they handle being disagreed with, how they react to disappointment, how quickly they defend their image. The more they panic, the more they reveal. Now comes the more advanced layerman, manipulation through understanding. When you truly understand someone's internal framework, their fear of being alone, their need to be respected, their desperation for control, you gain invisible leverage. This is not to be used for cruelty, but for clarity. If you know what someone needs, you can predict their next move. You can make them believe it was their idea. You can lead without being seen. Most people are simply repeating the same emotional responses their past conditioned them to have. They are not original, they are reflexive. And if you can decode the reflex, you can forecast the storm. People often confuse intelligence with speech, but in this game, the smartest one is the quietest observer. In every room, watch the dynamics. Who speaks to dominate, who laughs too loudly, who seeks approval through flattery, who avoids eye contact, who mirrors too much. These are not just quirks, they are signals. Reading people is not about making fast conclusions, but about seeing the system behind the behavior. Don't react emotionally, don't assume too quickly, gather slowly, build the map, see the patterns. And once the picture is complete, you'll know more about them than they know about themselves. But here's where it deepens. Once you master the surface, you must begin to manipulate the setting. Reading people instantly becomes easier when you control the environment. Shift the context and watch them adapt. People show different versions of themselves based on power balance, emotional cues, and who they believe is watching. Put someone in front of an audience, they will act brave. Remove the audience, they may collapse. Give someone a taste of what they desire, then pull it away and watch whether they fight, beg, or retreat. These are not cruel tests, they are clarifying ones. Because the world is filled with pretenders, and if you don't test, you will be deceived. You must also understand that trust is a weapon, and it works both ways. When you appear to trust someone, they become overconfident. They relax, they reveal more. People want to be trusted because it gives them a sense of control. Give it to them, but never actually surrender control. Be the one who watches while they celebrate your supposed naivety. In time, they will show their cards, believing you have shown yours, and when that moment arrives, act if necessary, but more often than not, knowing is enough. Control is not about action, it is about position. And the one who understands others without being understood always holds the highest ground. Never forget the rule of projection. People reveal their intentions by accusing others of what they secretly carry themselves. The liar will tell you not to trust, the unfaithful will preach loyalty, the weak will talk endlessly about power. When someone speaks passionately against something, listen carefully. They may be at war with that very thing inside themselves. The louder the denial, the deeper the truth. The more emotional the claim, the more personal the confession. Don't take their words as fact, decode them as camouflage, because in the end, reading others is less about analysis and more about detection. You're not solving a puzzle, you're revealing a performance. Now that you understand the value of silence, the power of patterns, and the gift of tension, you are ready to walk into any room and see people, not just their faces, but their fears, their drives, their masks. But the real mastery begins when you don't just read others, you design your own image so well that while you're seeing through everyone, no one can see through you. That's the highest form of power. When you no longer reveal what you want, when your silence speaks louder than their noise, when you become unreadable, yet read all, people reveal themselves in their desires, not their words. This truth is at the core of all human behavior, and yet it's the most overlooked principle in every social interaction. Words are cheap. They're rehearsed, often imitated, and always filtered through the need for social acceptance. People say what they believe will protect them or benefit them. They tell you what sounds noble, respectable, or intelligent, but beneath this verbal performance lies something far more honest, the pull of desire. Desire is raw, instinctive, and unfiltered. It shows up in what people prioritize, how they react to opportunity, and the paths they repeatedly choose. If you pay attention to what someone pursues when they have freedom of choice, you begin to see who they truly are. Look closely at what excites someone, not what they claim to care about, but what energizes them without effort. Do they light up when discussing status? Do they lean in when gossip arises? Do their eyes sharpen when competition is mentioned? These are not trivial moments, they are signals, flashes of their internal compass. People don't chase what they don't want. A person obsessed with control will gravitate toward leadership roles, even in subtle ways. Someone addicted to validation will constantly steer conversations back toward themselves, fishing for praise, dressed in false humility. Their desires reveal their wiring. You can tell 1,000 things about a person not by asking them who they are, but by observing what they pursue when no one is pressuring them. Pay attention to their habits. What do they repeatedly do when no reward is offered? A man who voluntarily steps into the spotlight is announcing a thirst for recognition. A woman who always positions herself close to powerful individuals is showing her understanding of hierarchy and influence. These are not coincidences, they are behavioral confessions. Desires don't hide for long. They seep into tone, posture, timing. They show up in the way someone enters a room, in what they rush toward, and what they silently avoid. If you want to read someone instantly, do not be fooled by their disclaimers. Watch their energy. It always moves in the direction of their longing. Even the smallest choices carry fingerprints of desire. What someone posts online, what they like, who they follow, these are micro-expressions of identity. People may lie with their mouths, but their patterns never lie. The man who praises modesty but flaunts luxury items is not a contradiction. He is revealing a fragmented desire for status cloaked in false humility. The person who claims to dislike drama but constantly involves themselves in tension is not unaware. They are driven by a need to feel significant even if it's through chaos. Desires are not always noble, and that is what makes them honest. They reflect what someone feels, not what they want to be seen as. The real challenge is training your eye to see beyond verbal presentation. Most people are conditioned to trust words. This conditioning makes them blind to contradiction. But a trained observer sees conflict between claim and behavior as an opening. If someone says they value loyalty but change friends constantly, there is a misalignment. That misalignment is your insight. It tells you that loyalty is not a value, it's a performance. Perhaps they crave loyalty from others without intending to give it themselves. Perhaps they fear abandonment and mask it with control. Either way, the truth is not in what they say, but in what they repeat. Their choices, especially under no obligation, are where the truth lies. Desire also reveals hierarchy. What someone wants the most often tells you where they feel the weakest. A person who longs to be admired may have grown up invisible. One who chases power may have once felt helpless. A man who obsessively seeks female validation may be compensating for a deeply rooted sense of inadequacy. The pursuit gives away the insecurity. This isn't about judgment, it's about perception. Once you identify what someone needs to feel whole, you understand how they can be influenced, motivated, or even manipulated. You don't need to coerce, you only need to offer what they already crave. And that level of psychological insight begins with seeing desire as a map, not a mystery. At its core, desire bypasses logic. It doesn't ask for permission, it doesn't negotiate, it commands. People may tell you they value discipline, but the way they spend their free time will tell you if pleasure outranks purpose. They may say they love knowledge, but if they never study or ask questions, what they actually value is appearing wise, not being wise. This distinction is everything, because if you rely on words, you'll be played. But if you track desire, you'll never be deceived. Desire is the closest thing to truth that most people ever expose. And once you train yourself to see it clearly, you'll never see people the same way again. Control comes from observation, not reaction. Most people believe that to maintain influence or gain power, they must act quickly, speak confidently, or assert their dominance. But this belief only reveals their insecurity. True control doesn't come from how loudly you speak or how often you intervene. It comes from how deeply you understand. And understanding only emerges from patient, detached observation. The moment you react, you've given up your center. You've shifted from observing the battlefield to participating blindly in it. Those who react first are the easiest to manipulate because they've already surrendered their internal equilibrium. They reveal too much, too soon, leaving nothing left to study in others and everything open to be studied in themselves. Silence is not weakness, it is strategy. The one who watches absorbs more than the one who speaks. In any conversation, the person who fills the silence reveals more. People are uncomfortable with quiet. They rush to fill it with explanations, justifications, or confessions disguised as small talk. And the more someone speaks, the more they expose their values, fears, insecurities, and patterns. If you train yourself to resist the urge to respond, to simply listen with full attention and minimal expression, you create a psychological vacuum. That vacuum compels others to reveal themselves, mistaking your silence for agreement, weakness, or admiration. And as they speak, their real motives leak out, unguarded and unfiltered. This is where the observer gains control, by becoming a mirror. Instead of projecting your thoughts, reflect theirs. Instead of competing to be heard, remain intentionally still. Let them believe they're in charge. Let them feel dominant. The more they believe they are leading the interaction, the more their ego will expand and their guard will fall. In that space, you collect intelligence. You learn how they respond to subtle tension, how they interpret ambiguity, how they try to impress or intimidate. Every word they say is a clue. Every choice they make in your silence is a statement of who they believe they are and who they think you are. And when you say little, they project their assumptions onto you, which tells you everything about them. A reaction is a trap. It anchors you to someone else's emotional rhythm. The moment you react, you allow them to set the tempo, the tone, and the meaning. Even if your reaction feels justified, anger, offense, or even laughter, it reveals your internal state and, worse, your psychological weak points. The observer, however, stays outside the storm. They watch not just the behavior of others, but the dynamics in the room. Who seeks validation, who adjusts themselves to the dominant voice, who changes their tone based on status. These are not random quirks. They are social strategies rooted in instinct. And if you can map the social terrain without becoming entangled in it, you rise above it. You become the only person who is not trying to survive the environment, but shaping it silently. Control doesn't mean domination. It means direction. And direction can only be established when you know where everyone else is already headed. By observing without reaction, you begin to predict. You see the loops in people's behavior. You notice how a certain question always triggers defensiveness, how a specific gesture always precedes a lie, how flattery always changes their tone. These repetitions are gold. They're algorithms of behavior. The more you observe, the less surprised you become, and the less surprised you are, the more control you wield, because now you are responding from knowledge, not emotion. You're no longer guessing, you're calculating. Control is a slow game won by those who delay their impulses. Even in conflict, the observer wins. While others argue, defend, or attack, the observer remains calm. This calmness unsettles those who expect a reaction. It deprives them of the satisfaction of control. They want to provoke you because your reaction validates their position. But when you give them nothing, no visible anger, no emotional shift, they become uncertain. And uncertainty weakens their confidence. This is a silent form of domination. You've said nothing, but you've already taken the higher ground. You own the emotional space without claiming it out loud. The greatest power is not in being seen as strong, but in being unreadable, and the unreadable man or woman is always one thing above all else: observant. They don't move unless they understand. They don't speak unless there's value. They are not puppets pulled by words or emotions. They sit still while others dance around them, and in that stillness they gather the truth. Control isn't in the hand that moves first, it's in the mind that sees everything and moves last with precision. The observer always controls more than the participant, because they are shaping outcomes while others are still chasing reactions. The mask cracks under pressure. Every human being walks through life wearing a carefully constructed mask, an identity sculpted to meet social expectations, maintain emotional safety, or manipulate perception. This mask can be charming, intelligent, humble, or even submissive. It's not always malicious, but it's almost always deceptive. People rarely show their true selves in calm, controlled environments because in safety, the mask serves its purpose. But when pressure is applied, when stakes rise, when emotions escalate, when comfort is removed, that mask begins to slip. The polished surface fractures and the raw, unfiltered self emerges. If you truly want to understand someone's nature, do not observe them in peace. Observe them in discomfort, because under pressure, truth leaks out where performance used to dominate. You don't need to inflict chaos or cruelty to apply pressure. In fact, subtlety is more powerful. A delayed response, a silent stare, a broken expectation, or a challenge to their authority is enough to test the mask. When someone is ignored after speaking, do they grow agitated, shrink into silence, or overcompensate with humor? When someone is questioned in front of others, do they defend with logic, escalate with aggression, or appeal for sympathy? Each reaction is a window. The untested person is unknowable. But when you introduce friction, however slight, you create the necessary contrast to reveal what lies beneath their projected identity. Reactions under pressure are not rehearsed. They are instinctive. And instinct cannot be faked for long. Watch how people handle rejection, especially public rejection. The confident mask may boast about indifference to others' opinions, but if a simple denial or criticism causes them to unravel, the mask was never confidence. It was fear wrapped in arrogance. Observe how someone behaves when their competence is questioned. Do they welcome scrutiny, or do they instantly deflect, blame, or lash out? Weakness disguises itself in many forms: humor, intellect, charm, but it always shatters when pride is threatened. The strongest indicator of someone's emotional architecture is how they act when they no longer feel in control. The more they struggle to regain that control, the more they expose their real priorities: dominance, approval, or escape. Silence itself is a form of pressure. When someone expects a response and you offer none, the void they feel compels a reaction. That reaction is unscripted. It comes from their emotional core. They might fidget, ramble, shift blame, or press harder for validation. Each of these behaviors gives you a deeper read than anything they could ever admit in words, because in silence they aren't responding to you. They're revealing themselves to themselves. That's the power of psychological tension. It creates a self-confrontation. When the external environment stops affirming their image, they're forced to reckon with the insecurity they usually keep buried. The need to fill silence becomes the trigger for authenticity. Even in casual social situations, pressure unveils the truth. Who do they become when someone else is praised more? Who are they when they're no longer the center of attention? What happens when you compliment someone else in their presence? Jealousy disguised as subtle deflection, insecurity masked as forced laughter, envy dressed as distant indifference. These aren't flaws, they're signals. When someone is forced to watch others receive what they secretly desire, their ego leaks out in fragments. And those fragments, when pieced together, reveal more than hours of friendly conversation ever could. Pay close attention to the shift in tone. Under pressure, the voice changes, the smile becomes tighter, the eyes dart more often, the breathing shallows. These micro-changes are cracks in the mask. The words may remain diplomatic, but the energy betrays them. This is where reading people becomes an art form, not in what they say, but in how they say it when discomfort strikes. You can ask harmless questions and then apply just a touch of friction. Perhaps suggest they're wrong or ignore their answer, and watch how they respond. The fragile persona always wants to reassert control quickly. The stable individual remains still. Stability doesn't panic, but instability rushes to correct, to explain, to be liked again. Even more telling is who someone blames under pressure. Do they take accountability, or do they immediately shift it to someone else? This reaction is crucial. It reveals not just ego but worldview. A person who cannot hold discomfort is a person who cannot hold power without misusing it, because power magnifies pressure, and if they crumble under small tension, they will implode under greater responsibility. So, the way someone responds to subtle discomfort predicts how they'll behave when given actual influence. The point is not to judge, but to reveal. To test a structure, you press against it. To see the strength of a bridge, you add weight. Likewise, to understand a person, you introduce pressure, not to harm, but to observe. The untested mask is nothing more than theater, but the mask under fire, that's where the truth bleeds through. Every person has a breaking point, a moment when the mask thins and the instincts rise. That moment, brief and unguarded, is worth more than months of words. And if you're patient enough, quiet enough, and sharp enough, you'll catch it. And once you do, you'll never see that person the same again.